Morning, everybody. So today we are going to see about the third part of the session, Angular directives. So I think you all attended the previous sessions, right? Everybody. So in the previous sessions, we would have seen about the introduction about client-side programming, what is the necessity, and what are the client-side frameworks available. Then from that, we picked AngularJS specifically. We saw its advantages, what and all we can do, and I hope in last session Saravanan would also have taken some advanced topics on AngularJS. So today we are completely going to see about one important section in AngularJS called directives. So as I mentioned in my previous sessions, directives are very much an integral part of AngularJS, with which we can achieve a lot more things. It has a lot more advantages, especially from the reusability point of view. So the agenda of today is going to be so today we are going to see about a brief introduction about directives. What's a directive? What is its structure? How directive works? Its life cycle. Then we are going to see about the two different types of directives. One is built-in directives, which is already there, which comes with AngularJS, and how we can develop our own directives, that is custom directives. Then we'll see some practical live demo how the directive works, and if time permits, we'll see about an additional topic called as translations, how translation works practically. So it's going to be actually a very simple session, but always remember directives is not so easy to develop like the other parts of AngularJS, like how we use a controller and all. Directives are not so easy. So only way with which we can develop our knowledge directives is by practice. The same thing. You have to practice a lot, start creating your own directives, start from small directives, then go to the complex one. Then learn how to use debuggers in your browsers to understand which event fires after which event. Because whenever people start working with AngularJS, most of the doubts they come back and ask to me is I have a variable, I have done everything correct, but the directive is not working. So this is a general question that comes. But in order to solve this problem, you have to learn how to debug properly. Then only you can clearly develop a directive, because directive is like a dense forest. Once you went inside and developing a directive, if you do some small mistake also, you will not know how to come back and solve it. Then again you have to rewrite it. So in order to avoid those type of confusions, you have to understand each and every minute part of directive, what it does, why it is there specifically, because every section of the directive is there for a purpose. Everything has its own purpose. Only if you understand its own purpose, you can develop your directive. In 1 hour session, I'll try to explain most of the parts as much as possible. But again, only if you go back to your desk and practice, you can develop its knowledge. Okay. So before we get into directives, I want to give a small refresh about what are the things we have seen so far. Okay, the first thing in my previous section which I explained is if you take any AngularJS application, the broader picture starts with app. Everybody will remember it. So app is the starting point of any AngularJS applications. Once you have an application.js, then it is divided into several modules. So each app is divided into several modules. And in each module, what are the two important components? Sorry? Controller and views. So those are mandatory parts. Apart from controller and mandate, controller and view, what are the other things present in a module? Services, batteries, then directives, which we are going to see here. So from this, what we can understand means a directive is not compulsory for any controller or view. So it's not like you can have your AngularJS application only if there is a directive. No, it is not like that. But a directive is something which is apart from mandatory stuff, but which can be reused. For example, I take a page. In that page, a small component is there. Say a calendar component. You have customized that calendar component, and in your whole application, if you are going to reuse that calendar, then you can separately keep it as a directive and then call in all the modules. Fine. And the second important part is a directive can be commonly written for a module or for an entire application, which means it is not necessary that a directive has to present inside a module. The directive can present inside a module means it can be only shared in the module between different controllers or between different views. If you write a directive outside your module, then it can be distributed across the application. Understood? So it's not like if you have a controller written inside a module, you cannot use the controller outside the module. You understand? You want me to picturize this? Understand, right? So it's not like a controller, it's something similar to service and factory which sits outside a module and it can be distributed, and it can be used across all the modules. Okay? Services we'll see in the next section. Okay. So to explain what is a directive, this definition clearly explains it. So that's why I have separated it. At a high level, directives are markers on DOM elements. So generally you have DOM elements like this. It can be anything, HTML, div, span, anything. Okay. So on a DOM element, a directive is nothing but marker. Okay. So where this div comes from? Put open tag and then div, then what happens? A div is created. Are you creating this div? No, it's a part of DOM. But you can have something in your tag which is created by you, and this word is going to give a different meaning for the tag. Okay. For example, if you want this div to be movable, okay, you have a page and you have an image here. Okay. If you want this image to be draggable so that it can be dragged and dropped in some part of your page, you have to add some listeners to it, some event to it, right? You need to change its CSS. So for example, now it is in 330, 440 means if you want to move here, then you have to change the CSS to 150, say 200, so that this image will be moved here. Okay. So in order to do this action, you need some additional stuff in that div which tells the DOM to move from this position to this. Right? So those events, those CSS changes will be clubbed and placed inside something which is called as a directive. Using? So for now, just understand it is a marker. Okay, something which is going to change its behavior. Okay, and that marker can be any of these things. So for example, in a div, if you say there is something called as ng app. So before I write ng app inside this tag, this just behaves as a simple div. It's a static div, won't do anything. But from the moment you put this directive here, ng app, then whatever stuff which you are going to write inside this div is going to be an Angular application. It's going to behave like an Angular app. So there is some marker, some text that is going to change the behavior of this div, and that is called as a directive. Okay, that's what it says. Directives are markers on a DOM element. This is a DOM element. This is a marker that tells AngularJS HTML compiler it is going to communicate with your AngularJS to attach a specified behavior. What I said here, till before I keep that marker, it's a static text. But the moment I put a directive marker, it is going to tell the compiler of AngularJS to do something, to change its behavior. Okay, via event listeners. You need something to communicate with the AngularJS, right? That is called as an event listener. And that event listener communication happens with AngularJS. So all these functions, keeping a marker, changing the DOM element, communicating with the AngularJS, everything will be taken care by this simple text, nothing but directive. So definition is clear. Tomorrow if someone asks you to explain what is a directive, you don't have to say anything else except this. Remember these few words, markers and DOM element, changes HTML behavior via event listeners. Fine?
So instead of markers, we can say like AngularJS attribute in a DOM element.
Yeah. You can't restrict that directive as an attribute because we'll see in the next slides. A directive can be an element, a directive can be an attribute, a directive can be a comment, or a directive can be a class also. For example, if you say class equal to directive name, then that will also change the behavior of that marker. Okay, so it's not like only element or only attribute. There are 4 types. That we'll see what are the types of the directives in that there. That's a good question actually. So it's not only an attribute. Sometimes there are directives which will be like this. We'll see that in detail in types. Sometimes you can give the directive as a class also. That we'll see in there is a property called as a E, where we'll see the difference between these types. Okay. Okay. Now the second important part is, as I mentioned earlier, directives are 2 types. One is built-in, second one is custom. Whatever you see here are built-in. You can ask me how you are saying these are built-in directives, how I know. There are a lot of directives. In the previous session, I think I have mentioned it. Whatever starts with ng hyphen are built-in directives. Okay? And I don't think that I have to explain each and every of them. Its name itself suggests. First one is what? ng app. Where do you use ng app? Sorry?
Module application.
Module? Root. In the root, the first part, the app which starts no. So ng app equal to, we will give the application name. So it's a simple directive is going to do so much stuff, right? If we just say ng equal to app, it converts our normal div into an application. Then you can say ng class. The name itself suggests you use class, right? While giving style to DOM elements. So ng class you can give. Then you can ask me what is the difference between a class and an ng class. To give an example, if you say if you're saying like class equal to say padding 5 pixels. Okay, so what it does, it gives padding to that div. Simple. Now your requirement is dynamically you have to change the class. For example, I'm logging in with a user called as ABC. The moment ABC user logs in, the page should be displayed in blue color. Now another user logs in, his name is DEF. If DEF logs in, the page should be shown in some other gray color. So dynamically based on data which comes from the backend, you have to change the behavior or you have to change some style of the page means it can be done using ng class. I'm not going to explain all these things because that itself will take me 1 hour. So what you have to do means Go to any simple site called W3 Schools or any AngularJS site, you will get explanation about all these directives. Just do one thing, create a simple AngularJS app, have an HTML page, try all these ones. You can understand, okay? So for now, what you have to take from this session is, there is something called as built-in directives, which does some predefined activities for us, and these are them. Okay, so why I have kept it here means, I said markers here, right? So these are markers. Okay. I don't have to explain this one. DOM elements. This is a compiler. So AngularJS comes with a compiler, which is called as $compile. You don't have to compile it separately. It comes along with compile. So if you just write the code and save means, AngularJS will automatically take care of changing its behavior. And finally, I said it compiles via event listeners. Again, event listeners are divided into two types. There are built-in event listeners. You can write your own custom event listeners. So, for example, one of the widely used event listener is, we have something called as emit. Okay. In single page application, as I said, there are multiple views. Okay. If you have to communicate some data or action from one view to another view, one controller to another controller means, without having any post back, you can do it with emit. An example is, assume you have two different pages. In one page, you are doing some action. So for example, you are adding a product and saving. Okay. Some other user is watching the second page. Okay. So when you added the product, he's looking at the product list. Say he is having 5 products there. The moment you added 6th product here, that user should be notified without any postback, without any explicit event. How that can be happened is, once the save is completed, he can raise an event called as emit. Say a product saved. If you have a code in the another page which is having a listener, the emits, it works in like pairs. The listener of emit is called as on. Okay, just notice these words emit and on, you can Google it and find. So the moment you say emit, in this page if there is a code on, and inside that on, if you have the same name called product saved, it will be notified that some product is added, and you can see show the next product. So this is just an example of one event. Like this, there are so many events present in AngularJS, and again you have to Google it. Okay? But just understand, you have markers which changes the DOM elements via event listeners, and an example of event listener is emit and on. Like emit and on, you have so many other event listeners. Fine? So now you get the basic idea what a directive is. Till now, any questions? Go to the next part. The simple thing which explains why we need directives. First thing is explicit interface. What is an interface? What's an interface? Something which you use, something which you see. Okay? So, for example, if you take an HTML page, whatever you see is an interface, user interface. Okay? So, directive has its explicit interface, which means it has its own interface. For example, say a marriage is happening. Okay? You have a decorator. You have decoration section. If you just tell him, I want decoration, and if you give money, that's enough. What he will do? He will bring his own chairs. He will bring his own flowers. So he is a directive, and he is having his own interface. I don't own that interface. I don't own those chairs. I don't own those flowers. But if I just pay money, he will just decorate my hall, right? So he is having his own things, right? Likewise, directive has his own things, and one of those things is an interface. He have a visual representation which he brings. If I say this image div is a directive, this directive has its controller, this directive has its view HTML page, so he has his own interface. My application doesn't have to own him. If I just call this, it will bring its own interface. Okay, so that is one of the basic and most important advantage of a directive. Second thing is most important, reusable. If you have some reusable functionality, you can keep it in that. Then it avoids, mitigates side effects. It means if you are writing a directive, it will not have its effects on other DOM elements on that page. If it is affecting, it's not a good directive. Okay. So for example, we saw so many built-in directives like, so for let us take ng repeat. So if I put ng repeat, if I give a collection of objects, it will repeat and show me all the objects one by one. And that is not going to affect the elements which are present above it or the elements present below it. It should be independent. Okay. So independent, reusable, explicit interface. These three are the most important advantages of directives. Again, an interview question. Okay, so if somebody asks you what is a directive, explain them the previous one. If they ask you what are the important advantages of a directive, these three are the ones. Okay, I think this is the same thing. I want to explain few of them because you'll be using in your day-to-day activities. Yeah, you saw something called as ng-if. Okay, generally one of the mistakes people do is they will instead of putting ng-if, they will put ng-show. ng-show is there. Yeah, ng-show is there. See, all the directives have the unique behavior, but instead of understanding them properly, people started misusing it. ng-show is also almost for the same purpose. Let us say I have these three DOM elements in my page. Okay, based on some condition, boolean or something, I am putting ng-show in all these three cases. So if that condition is satisfied or if the boolean is true, it will be shown or it will not be shown. Okay, same thing can be achieved with ng-if also. Same thing, exact behavior. Then you can ask me why I should go for these two things. ng-show, what it does means it applies that DOM element in the page, here in the page, but only it will not be shown. It will be rendered. So for example, if there are 100 divs and only one condition is satisfied, only one will be shown, but all the 100 divs will be rendered in that page. So it will affect the performance of the page. But if you put ng-if, only based on those condition ng-if, that element alone will be rendered. Again, the user will be seeing only one div in both the cases, but the difference is rendering of the element. So likewise, there are so many inbuilt directives which will be confused while using. For example, another example is you have something called as ng-bind here and ng-model here. Again, it does the same thing. ng-bind and ng-model both does same thing. But there's a very minute difference which you should understand to use it in proper place. ng-bind acts as single-way communication. For example, in a controller, you have a variable called as a equal to hello. If you just want to show that a equal to hello in a label, then you can go with ng-bind because label is not going to communicate with my controller. Second, two-way communication is not going to happen. But if the same variable is going to be shown in a text box, and text box you can change, right? If the value changes, the scope has to be changed. So two-way data binding has to happen, right? In that case, you can go with ng-model. So why I am giving this ng-if show, ng-bind model examples are, there are certain directives which behaves almost in the same way. But only if you understand the difference between those things, you can use it in a proper way. Okay. Once what happened in one of my application, we had a big performance problem and everything was, the code was neat, everything was good, but still the page was behaving very badly. The only thing which we finally did was remove all ng-show and applied ng-if. The performance was very good. Okay. So next time when you have a problem like this in your Angular pages, just sit and think about all the directives, study about its behavior, then start correcting it. Okay. So it's very, very important for all of you to understand about all these inbuilt directives, at least to work with AngularJS. Even if you are not much aware of custom directives, you can manage to some extent. But without knowing these built-in directives, you cannot move forward. So please, please, please go and have a look at it. Okay. Now, the difficult part, custom directives. Visual Studio comes with a lot of templates. For example, when you create a project, it will ask you options, right? Whether it's an empty application or API or single page. Why we have so many things, so many options? When you create a new project, it asks such options. You are aware of that fact, right? You give a new project, it will ask empty application or API or single page, etc. So what it does for us, for example, if I select single page, what it does for me?
Makes our job easy.
Makes a job easy. Because there are so many reusable things that we can use in an application and that will be compulsorily used, so it creates for us. But was that enough for our application? Our requirements changes. We have our own custom requirements. We have some requirements which may not be required for another application, right? So in that case, what we will do, we will start developing our own application. We will start developing our own HTML, own JS, own CS, etc. So likewise, even though AngularJS gives lot of inbuilt directives, we have our own custom requirements for which we need to write our own custom directives. And AngularJS gives us this provision to have our own directives. It's not restricted. And that can be achieved via writing custom directives. Okay. So if you are a good Angular developer, it can be understand from the fact that how much your own custom directives you are writing. I've seen people who write their applications with controller view itself. They'll have lot of pages, lot of control, lot of view, no directives. Okay. So what happens there means you will be again and again rewriting code. So basically, you're not following the single page concept at all. One of the important uses of single page is reusability, and one of the important things that helps us in having reusability is directives. Okay. So coming back to the topic, custom directive structure generally looks like this. It's not this simple. This is one of the generic structure of a custom directive. Okay, if you take any custom directive, these things will be present there, and whatever not highlighted, no, these are compulsory stuff. That is mandatory stuff, and these are optional stuff. Okay. So again, how we created our modules? You remember? What is the signature for creating a module?
Angular.
Okay. And app?
NGF, the same name.
NGF. How we created controllers?
Inside module.
So likewise, directives also follow same signature. The signature for creating controller, service, factory, module doesn't changes at all. So initially you have a module inside which I say dot directives. So first you created a module, signature is same, name, then that array, all these things I explained in previous session. Then dot directive, inside which you will give the directive name, same signature. And then inside that you will have function. Inside the function you will have all your custom code. So coming to every section here, we'll have few things like require, transclude, template URL, scope, link, and whatever it means there like restrict, controller, replace. So 7, 8, 9. Okay. So these 9 attributes are part of a directive. Okay. Now I'll explain all those 9. Please listen to them very carefully. You should understand this in order to write your custom directives. Okay. First, we'll see about require. What is written there in require first of all? Require tabs. Okay. In a directive, a require is used to share controllers from its parent and child elements. Assume we have a page, we have a requirement like this where I have to create tabs and also I have to create its child tabs. Okay, and my requirement is like I have a plus button here which adds a new tab for me. So if I click plus, it will add tab 13. So dynamic creation of DOM elements. I have a requirement like this. So what I will do means this will be used across in all the pages. So I have decided to move this part of functionality to a directive. So I write a directive called tabs. This part. Okay. And for each tab, you have this functionality of adding a new tab to it. Okay. This part of functionality, I move to another directive called as tab alone. Okay. What happens when you create a tab? Say here there is a counter. Initially the counter is 2. Now my client asks me, whenever you create a new tab, this counter should be increased. This is a separate directive. This is a separate directive. But when you do something, this directive behavior should be changed. Okay. Assume I have a function called increase counter. Because the counter is present in the parent directive, right? So I have a functionality called increase counter in the parent. But when it has to be fired? When I do something in my child directive. So this directive has its own controller. This directive has its own scope. Again, this directive has its own controller and scope. Both are independent. How they are going to communicate? You may tell me you can use the emit function which I explained in the previous section. Okay, but emit generally what happens means if those things are completely independent of different modules, you can use emit because it adds some extra traffic for communication. But in this case what happens means since they are in the same page or they are going to be used associatively and it's a child directive for this parent directive, you can share the scope between these two directives. Okay, and that can be handled via require property. So what I have said here, require tabs. So when you create a tab, this code is for creating this directive tab, and for creating this tab, I require this. Why? Because I do something here, it updates something here. Okay. So when I put tabs here, you have something called tabs controller. This controller is not belonging to this directive, but its parent's controller. So the moment I put like this, I can share its parent's controller here. So from now onwards, whatever I do in my child directive, I can do extra stuff in the parent directive as well with the help of the controller. I have the controller, right? So once I have controller, I can do anything in my parent. Clear? So now you know why we use require.
So there are nested directives up to 3 levels.
Yes.
And ours is the lowest level. And I want a function to be called in the first level. So then also the same
yes,
thing.
Then also same thing.
So we'll just give the top levels controller name.
Exactly.
And what if it is vice versa? The counter is in the directive. In a scenario, the counter is in the directive and I'm changing something.
For that, there is one more property which I will explain. For that, there is something called a scope, which we will see. So what he is asking is, from child to parent, use this. From parent to child, if I want to pass something, how? He is asking, that we will see in the scope. Here something called a scope, there we will see. Okay. So the first thing required is clear? Yeah, this is syntax we have to use this simple. Next thing we are going to see is, yeah, so this is the code, I explained it here. You have a tabs directive. Inside that you have lot of tabs. Okay, so the moment you put required tabs here, you can pass its controller, and that controller function can be used inside the tab. Okay, the second thing what we saw here is transclude. This is a very simple property. You can see from this example itself. So I have my directive, called as my directive. It's a very simple directive. It has something called template. Okay. And here I haven't included this property transclude true, which means if you don't include something, it's by default false. So here it's transclude is false. Now, if I use my directive here, so this is my directive creation code here, and I use this directive here. So inside div, I am using my directive, and my output will be like this. It will show only the template code which is present here. Though I have some two extra controls inside my div called button and a anchor tag, it is not displayed here. It just displays the content which is present inside this template. Alternatively, I include transclude true for the same code, exact same code. I put transclude true. Now your output will be this. So you have this button, anchor tag, as well as this content. This is my directive content. Okay. So if you put transclude equal to true, it will not replace the existing content, but it will just append your template. So your existing template says A, your directive template says B. If you put transclude true, it says AB. If you don't put transclude true, it will just says the directive control B, A will be replaced. Very simple, right? Any confusion? The next thing we are going to see about is template URL, the third property. Template and template URL, there are two stuff. Any one will be present at a time, not both. Okay, it's very simple. If your directive content is going to be very simple, like this. So this directive is just going to show a message to me, a simple div tag. Then you can put it in template itself. Okay, but assume your directive is going to do a lot of stuff. Its HTML DOM text is very complex, so that you cannot type it here or you cannot keep it here. You can type it, but it's a little bit difficult. So you want to move your content to a separate HTML file. So what you can do, you can take this code, place it in an HTML file, but then instead of saying template, just say template URL and give it path. So here it's shown. So here I have used template, here I have used template URL. So my text is my first directive, this double quotes whatever I have mentioned is my text HTML content. But here what I have done means I have moved it into a div.template HTML and given its path. Okay, so what and all we have seen till now? Required. Why is required? Parent to child communication. Transclude. Sorry?
Appending existing template.
Appending?
Existing.
Appending or not appending? Why template? Why template? To add HTML content directly in the directive. Why template URL? To have HTML content in a separate HTML. So if you take any page, we have two things, right? Controller and HTML. So if that HTML content is going to present inside the directive means template, separately means template URL. Okay. Restrict is a separate topic, we will see. Scope is also a separate topic. Controller, then. Yeah. Now, one of the important properties, till now whatever properties we saw is a very simple one. It is required, but not that much important. It's very easy to understand, very easy to remember. But the scope, you should handle very, very carefully in a directive. Okay, scope is the one, it's like a jalebi. You will forget from where you came from if you don't use the scope properly. So scope, what it does means, what's the scope first of all?
Model.
It's a model. It's going to hold some value for me. And root scope means model common for the entire application. Likewise, this scope is model which is specific for the directive. Okay. In my advantages, I said it is independent, right? It doesn't depend on anything else, which means it has its own interface. Likewise, it has its own model. A directive has its own model in the name of scope. Okay. Though it is independent, though it has own model, you are not going to use directive directly as a page, right? If we have a page, it is independent. A page gets data from backend, it shows. But directive is not going to be that much independent like a page, because again you have to use the directive inside where? Inside of a page, right? And you can also use the directive inside a directive. So a directive is always going to have a parent. You can remember it like that. So a directive always requires a parent, and that parent can be a page or can be another directive. Okay, so why I am saying this point means, since it has a parent, something should be transferred to the directive, right? I'll take a very simple example. I have a text box and I have written this inside a directive. I'm going to use this directive in hundreds of places. But is this going to behave an independent entity, an empty text box? Is that what we required for? No, right? Based on the directive you use or based on the page you use, some content will be transferred to it, which will be shown inside the directive, right? So something has to transfer to the directive, or something should be transferred back from the directive to the page, to its parent. I will not call it as page hereafter, I will call it as parent. A parent can be a page or directive. So in order to have this transfer of data between directive and its parent, we use scope. Okay, I'll give another example. I have a tree-like structure. Okay, assume this parent node is there, no? This is a parent. This can be a page or directive. And these child elements, no, I have written as a separate directive. Okay, so to show something here, from where the data has to come to it, from its parent, right? This can be passed via scope. Okay, so in any scope, you need a variable or a model name which is always waiting for data from the parent. Okay, whenever a directive is used in a page, it should have a variable that is always waiting to listen something from its parent. Okay, and that can be written like this. This part you see, right? Scope title at. So there is a variable called title which is waiting to get data from its parent. So only with the help of this title we can transfer data to this directive, not any other way. If I'm saying, hey directive, show me a name, that name should be transferred via this variable. Okay. So how this can be written in a page means, what is my directive name? Tab. So it will be like this, a normal div. Okay. Then mention your directive name, marker. Okay. Now I have a value to pass to it, right? What is its name? Variable name? Title. So I will say title equal to ABC. First thing should be the directive name. Next thing should be the scope name. So if I say title equal to tab ABC, whenever the tab is created, the content displayed inside this is ABC. Understood why scope is used? Okay, so if you start learning more about directives, you can see different type of symbols inside a scope. Here the symbol uses at. Sometimes you use a symbol like equal to. Sometimes they'll use a symbol called and. Very confusing one if you don't understand it. But it's a very simple one if you just read it properly. Here it's mentioned. It's very simple. All this and, at and equal to can be understood in three simple ways. And means top to bottom. And means bottom to top. Equal to means two-way. Just remember it like this always. And means top to bottom. And means bottom to top. Equal to means two-way. Okay. Just remember this. Then while writing your directives, you can customize it as per your requirement. So and allows a value defined on the directive attribute to be passed to the directive's isolated scope. Complex statement, right? Read it again. And allows a value defined on a directive attribute. So directive attribute is the title to be passed to the directive's isolated scope. So in any AngularJS application, any AngularJS page, the value has to present in a scope to be displayed in a page. Agree with it? Only if the value is present in a scope, it will be displayed in the HTML. So in order to put the value inside the scope, this at is used from its parent. Best example is this one. So here what you can do, you can pass a value, display in the child. What you cannot do, if you change this title value, it will change in this parent scope. Generally in AngularJS, I say two-way binding. So if you have a variable, if the value is changed, it will be changed in its parent scope, right? But if you give it like this, you can only pass it from parent to child, and in the child, if the value is modified, it will not go up. So if your requirement is this, use add. Simple. Now vice versa. If you have a child value which does something and which invokes an event in the parent, use and. The best example is this one, okay? I have a controller which is my parent, okay? Controller name is app controller. So this is my parent. Inside that I have a function called call home. Simple function, call home. This is in where? Parent, not inside my directive. Then I write my directive called phone. And inside that I have a variable called dial equal to and or ampersand. If you put like this is the place where I am going to use. So I open a div, I mention my controller name. Inside that I am using that directive. Here. Then I say dial equal to call home. I am calling a function from my directive. But is this call home present anywhere inside my directive? Have I written call home function in my directive? No, but still I can call home. So this call home is going to call my parent's function called call home. Though there is no function called call home in my child, it is calling a function from a parent just because I have given dial equal to and symbol. So it is going to invoke a function in my parent. This is going to do something in my child. and is going to invoke a something in my parent. Confusion? Clear? Equal to is nothing but both. If you want a variable to behave in both ways, then you can simply put it as equal. So always safer side. People generally use equal to for safer side, but sometimes it is not so safe, because if there is a variable which is not supposed to do something in its parent, and if you give it as equal, then it is dangerous. I'll give an example. Now say you have a function called call home in both places. Okay? And this call home should only call its own call home method. But if you give it as equal to, no, it will first go give priority to its parent, then it comes to the child. So this will be true. So this is your mom's number, this is Prime Minister's number. Then it will unnecessarily call this. Okay? So always be safe while using this. Based on your requirement, choose the symbol. Okay? Any doubts? Nobody's asking doubts. I expect a lot of doubts in this session. I don't know how much you understood. Now, this part is going to explain how we can isolate a scope and a directive. Let us assume my parent is a controller again. Okay. Then I have one directive. That directive I will be using only inside my module, inside that controller part. So same page, I am going to use directive in two different pages. I am not talking about a scenario directive in multiple pages. In same page, I am going to use that directive in different places. Say there is a screen called as display all users. So displaying the user details I have written inside my directive. So for first user, second user, third user, same thing is going to be repeated. So same code, everything is same. Only thing that is going to change is what? User detail. And that user detail I have like a collection in my parent controller. Okay. So here you don't need separate controllers for those directives, right? Same code can be written, but only the data passed to the directive is changed. So that can be handled like this. So first I have created my directive called user info. Inside that user info I have given my all properties, and template is simple, so I have given it directly as a template. And in my controller I have two user details here. Okay. Now this can be used simply like this. So first I put user info user equal to Jacob. Then I put user info user equal to John. Okay. Same directive, same controller, only scopes are differing. And since scopes are differing, I can show two different data with same code. Got it? Before showing the life cycle, I want to explain about this question. What are the ways a directive can be written inside a page? There are basically four types with which we can mention the directive in a page. First one is element. What is an element? So instead of simple, instead of giving it like div ABC, assume ABC is my directive name, I can directly give it as an element. Is there something called ABC tag in HTML? No, it's my directive name. I can give it like this. So what it does, this tag will replace whatever template I have mentioned in my directive. No, that will be replaced here. So this is one way of defining a directive. Another way is usually used with attribute. Like this also we can mention. The third way is class. So if we just give class equal to ABC, then also it's fine. But how a directive is going to behave will be mentioned in this property called restrict. So next property. I showed something called restrict, right? So if you are going to say like restrict A, you can only use it like this. If you use it like this, it won't work. Okay? You can also say restrict A, E, C, M, which means you can use the directive in all 4 different ways. And if you don't give a restrict, don't worry, by default it is EA. Okay? Any doubts in this? Purpose of using class, good question. I'll show an example. Sometimes what happens, users want to keep it lightweight because having DOM elements is a little bit weighter than having a simple class. First reason. Second reason is sometimes people like it in languages everything is based on the text, like the casing it follows, right? So if they want to keep everything with the same casing, the class name as well as the properties, they will keep it as class. It's not widely used, but rare approaches where because of these reasons used. So here what you can see means, I have a directive. You can see like there is no directive name mentioned anywhere inside this text. So I have used ng repeat the custom directive, then a collection, then we have used another directives. But I haven't used any custom directive in this. I've just used class. But what happens means I have a list of directives with different class names, which comes dynamically from the backend. I don't know what is the class name that is going to come with me. But I know only there are different directives which are dynamically coming whose code is not managed by me. I have used one third-party directive where they have returned their code inside that by mentioning like restrict equal to C, which means I know there is a directive going to come, but I don't know what is the directive code, where I have to use anything, etc. Only thing that they will be giving me is their JS file, which is minimized, which you can't understand anything, and a list of class names. So in that scenario, what I can mention means, if I just say class equal to dynamic name, here it's dynamic, it's binded from the data which comes to this directive. So based on that class name, data will be binded to them. So this is a basic video app where different video applications changes based on the class name. Okay, this normalization is also very important because after doing so much hard work, you have to write it properly in HTML so that it should work. Many people write everything perfectly, but when they write in HTML, they miss this point. So normalization means directives are generally written in camel case. You'd have seen, right? ng app, ng repeat. So it's in the camel case like this. So for example, say there is a controller called ng controller. While if you take and see its code in Angular.js file, the directive name will be like this. So when you create a directive, you should create in a camel case if it has multiple words. If it's a single word, you can just give in small characters. And when you write it in the HTML, it should be written like ng hyphen. Wherever capital letter comes, it should be replaced by hyphen and its small letter. Control. HTML is not case sensitive, but AngularJS is case sensitive and it follows camel case. Sometimes people what they do means they'll simply put ng controller in the div, or they put ng hyphen capital C controller. These things will not work. It's very difficult to identify. You have a browser or a debugger where you can find this error, but just avoid this. Just remember the simple point. It should be camel case and it should be written like this: hyphen, small letter, whenever there is a capital letter. Okay. Okay. The final thing which you are going to see in this directives part is life cycle. Life cycle may not be important for you in the beginning stage when you start using directives. But when you go for some complex directives, life cycle is very important. Why means sometimes you will write a code. Life cycle, there are 4 parts like that. I'll explain that. Sometimes instead of writing your code inside controller, you will write inside post link or pre-link. These things will affect the execution. So any directive has these 4 important phases. First thing is called as compile, then controller, then pre-link and post-link. In this very important part is post-link and controller, but I'll just explain the other parts as well. What is compiler means? You have a directive written in your page. Okay? Page starts rendering. Before page renders, if you want to change any DOM element, that part of code should come inside compile. For example, you have a page where you are going to use your directive has a text box. Okay, since you are going to use the directive, sometimes you want to change its parent DOM element. Since I am going to use text box as a directive, I should show a text called a text box is going to be displayed. And that text should be displayed in its parent means that code should come in compile. So as the statement says, allows the directive to manipulate the DOM before it is compiled. Starting, first step. That happens in any page rendering. Next thing is controller. Controller I don't have to explain, is the same concept as a usual controller. It has all the functions, scope variables, model, everything inside the controller that will be executed after the page is rendered. So directive is rendered. Now the directive, if for example, if the directive contains a text box, if I'm going to change something, if you have to write some event on my text change, that should come inside the controller. Okay. Pre-link and post-link. Pre-link and compile are almost same. Only thing is compile is used to change the DOM before it is rendered, whereas pre-link is used to change the scope before it is rendered. DOM means the DOM elements on the page. Scope means the scope value I passed, right? For example, if you want to, I am passing a value called 4 from a parent to child in a variable called best example is email. I am passing an email address from my parent directive to child directive. But before it is rendered in my child page, I want to validate that email, whether it's email or not, whether it has @ symbol, it follows the email signature or not. If you have to do that validation, it should be done inside the pre-link, because the email value is not DOM, it's a scope value passed from parent to child. Okay, so that is pre-link. Post-link. Post-link means once the page is rendered, once the DOM is rendered, if you want to change that one DOM, before rendering changes means compile, after rendering changes means post-link. Again an example, the same tab example we can take. My tab is rendered. This child tabs, whatever is there, no, that should be rendered only after tab rendering, right? So this is a directive. So after this parent tabs are rendered, if I want to render its child elements, that part of code should come inside post-link. You understood the difference between these 4? What is compile? You have to answer. Before the DOM is rendered, if you want to make changes to the DOM, compile. What is controller? Same like what? Fusion controllers. All the actions of the directives. Pre-link. I think someone from Gurgaon is trying to answer, right? Pre-link means what? Return. You want to change the scope value before it is rendered, it is pre-link. Please take this seriously. This is going to create a lot of problems when you start using directives. The life cycle is very, very important to understand. Otherwise, you cannot proceed further. Post-link means after the page is rendered. Remember this example, this tab example. Parent is rendered in the directive, but after parent is rendered, child tabs has to be rendered, right? That functionality can be written post-link. In any directive, even if you write link, post link explicitly or not, even if you write the post link attribute or not, it will be executed. So even if you have a simple directive like show my name, that is the only template means, there also this post link will be executed. So in any directive, controllers and post link is mandatory, pre-link and compile are not mandatory based on your requirements. Okay, understood? Or no? You can see here. So the same thing. Before the page rendering, all these compiles first happen. Child, child, child. Even it has 10 child directives. First, everything will be executed. Then this combination, controller and pre-link will be executed at the same point of time. Once everything is rendered, post-link will be executed in the reverse manner. So if you have tabs, child tab, everything will be executed in this order. The compile, then controller and pre-link. But the post-link alone will be executed based on the reverse order. There's a specific reason for that. If there are some events from child that has to invoke on its parent, that part of code has to be executed first in the child, right? Then child expects an event in parent. That expects an event in its parent. So it will be executed in the reverse order. Fine? Any questions? Finally, I'll show an example, then we can see. Okay. So you can see a tree structure here, which I was mentioning. So I have written this as a directive. Okay. So this, the heading you see here, right? It is a directive. So only that code I have written for this entire tree. I have not written anything extra. For binding this part alone, I have written it. Thereafter, what I did means, in its post link, I called this one in an ng repeat. Okay. Then in its post link, I have called this one. In its post link, I have called this one. So though it's a complex tree structure which shows different type of elements, the amount of coding which I did is very minimal. I'll show you the code. So this is the code for that tree. So what I have mentioned here, this link is very important. Other things are very simple. Controller, template URL, scope. all are simple. The only thing which you have to see is in this link, I didn't mention like post link explicitly because I have only post link function. So if you have only post link function, you don't have to mention it as a post link separately. So if I write something inside link, by default it's a post link. So in this link, what happened means I have again binded an ng repeat. So for example, if this node is the data transferred from a parent to child, which is the first element I showed you at the top. If that node has children and length is greater than 0, which is nothing but if it has children, and if the node says show children, initially it is hidden, right? So only when I click it says show children. So if it show children, then bind all its child nodes. So inside that what I have done, I have written a ng repeat, then binded all its children. Children is nothing but again the same parent directive. Okay, so inside the same node, in the post link I have repeated. So if you write like this, what happens? You don't have to manually check for child in HTML. Here itself you can write a simple HTML which repeats its nodes, child node, then child node, then child node. Whatever levels they are, it will follow automatically. Simple, right? So only if you understand the life cycle, this link and pre-link, you can start developing a custom directives with your exact requirement. Okay. So I hope things which I explained today are clear. Honestly, before a few years, there was nobody to explain these things. We had to study by ourselves. But since you have known these concepts now, please go back to your desk, study all these things, think about all these things, and practice it. And if you have any questions, please come back to me. Okay? If you don't have any questions, you can leave.